The phone rang at 7:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock the moment I saw my mother's name illuminate the screen. Something contracted in my chest, that old, instinctive dread that had lived inside me since childhood, the kind that arrives before the mind understands why. I set down my coffee cup. I answered. "It's your brother's wedding tomorrow," she said. No greeting, no softness. Her voice had the clipped efficiency of someone reading from a list. "We took all your money, and we sold your apartment." Silence. Not mine, hers, she was letting it land. Then I heard my father's voice behind her, not directly into the phone but close enough to be heard, deliberately close, the way a man speaks when he wants you to know he is present and pleased. A low chuckle. Then in that smooth, unhurried voice I had spent my entire childhood trying to interpret. "Family needs your money, darling, not you." A pause. "Bye." The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, phone pressed against my palm, and waited for something to arrive inside me. Grief, fury, the hot, rising tide of betrayal. I had seen it coming for years in small ways, a drained account here, a forged signature there, and yet when the blow finally landed, fully, completely, I expected it to feel like a blow. I waited for my hands to shake. They didn't. Instead, I laughed. Not the laughter of someone who finds something funny. It was the quiet, exhaled laughter of someone who has just watched the last piece of an enormous puzzle click into place. I had been building toward this moment without knowing it. And now here it was, inevitable, clean, and already accounted for. My name is Camilla Hartwell, and my family had underestimated me for the last time. You should understand what I was to them before you understand what I became. I was the second child, the daughter, the one who arrived after Lucas, who had immediately eclipsed me by simply existing, loud, reckless, magnetic in the way only golden boys can be. My parents had wanted a son. They got him, and they never quite recovered their curiosity for anything else. I became, in their eyes, a useful background figure. Responsible, obedient, emotionally self-contained. The kind of child who doesn't require much maintenance, and can therefore be directed like water, toward whatever gaps need filling. My earliest memory of giving was at 11 years old, pressing folded birthday money into my mother's hand because the electricity had been shut off. She kissed my forehead and called me her good girl. I felt warm with pride that day. I did not yet understand that I had just established the central transaction of our relationship. Lucas failed out of university during his second year. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table. I was 23, 2 years into my first real job, and explained that it was not his fault. The professors had been unfair. The city had distracted him. He needed a second chance. I nodded. I transferred the money for his restart, every pound of it, across 2 semesters. He graduated eventually. Never thanked me. I don't believe he was ever told where the money came from. When their business collapsed, I was 28. The numbers were catastrophic, not bad luck but years of recklessness finally arriving at their natural end. They came to me looking smaller than I had ever seen them, my father's confidence dimmed to something hollow, my mother's composure fractured at the edges. I felt the strangest thing, pity, but also clarity. For the first time, I could see the mechanism clearly. The way they moved toward me in crisis, the way a plant moves toward light. Automatic, unconscious, entirely without guilt. Family takes care of family, my mother said. I helped them, of course I did. I was already who I was. But this time, for the first time, I did it with a condition. The documents took me 4 months to arrange. My attorney, a small, precise woman named Vera Chen, who had the demeanor of someone who had seen every variety of human bad faith, listened to me explain my family's situation without expression. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at me for a long moment. You want to help them, she said slowly, but you want to make sure they cannot use that help against you. I want to make sure, I said, that what is mine remains mine, whatever happens. She nodded once as if that settled something. Then we build a trust. The structure was elegant in its simplicity. My parents' remaining assets, including the apartment that had been purchased, in part, through years of my contributions, were transferred into a protective trust. On paper, it shielded those assets from creditors during the business collapse. In practice, it meant that the legal title of every protected property, including the apartment they believed was theirs to sell, sat firmly in my name. They signed the documents at Vera's office on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother wore her good coat. My father brought reading glasses but did not use them. He reviewed the papers the way wealthy men review contracts they consider beneath them, scanning surfaces without depth, nodding at Vera's explanations with the performative confidence of a man who would never admit he didn't fully understand something. Neither of them read a single clause with genuine attention. I watched their signatures appear on the pages and felt something settle in my chest, not relief but readiness. The way a keystone, placed precisely, suddenly makes an arch hold. Years passed, the business stabilized. Lucas's life accumulated its complications and its rescues, and slowly, quietly, my family returned to their default state, comfortable, confident, and entirely certain that I would always be there, that I would always give, that I would always absorb whatever they chose to take. They had no idea what I had arranged. They had no idea the apartment they believed they had sold to a developer last week, for my brother's wedding expenses, to cover the venue and the flowers and the champagne and the dress, had been sold to a buyer who was, in fact, my attorney. Every signature, every transfer, every detail. Anticipated, documented, sealed. The day of the wedding arrived cold and bright. I woke early and lay still in the apartment they thought they had taken from me, listening to the city below. The walls were familiar. The light was familiar. Nothing had changed. Nothing had been taken. I understood, in a way I couldn't fully articulate, that this was the morning everything they had built on my silence would finally meet the weight of truth. A courier arrived at 9. I signed for a sealed envelope addressed to my parents' home, a formal notice, certified and witnessed, documenting the fraudulent transaction, initiating legal proceedings, and freezing the sale entirely. Vera had prepared it weeks ago. I had simply been waiting for the right moment to send it. I imagined my mother opening it at the kitchen table, her hands going still, my father reading over her shoulder, his expression moving through confusion, then comprehension, then a cold, furious disbelief. I imagined Lucas, still in his dressing gown, unaware. I did not feel cruel imagining this. I felt something closer to a surgeon's calm, the knowledge that what was happening was necessary, that it would hurt, that the hurt was not the point. I dressed slowly. An ivory suit, simple cut, no ornamentation. I tied my hair back. I picked up the gift I had wrapped the night before, a velvet folder inside a white box, bound with a ribbon of soft ivory satin. Inside the folder, behind a single cream-colored card that read for the happy couple with love, were the documents. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment before I left. I had spent my entire adult life being the quiet daughter, patient, invisible, forgiving long before I was owed an apology. Today, I was something else entirely. The venue was extraordinary, the kind of space that announces money the way a shout announces itself, all crystal chandeliers and cascading white roses and starched linens that caught the late afternoon light. A string quartet played near the entrance. Waitstaff moved in precise circuits with trays of champagne. Every surface gleamed. 200 guests, at least. Colleagues, old family friends, people who had watched my brother grow up and considered his wedding a milestone in a lineage they respected. The room smelled of white flowers and warm wax, and the particular sweetness of an occasion that expects nothing to go wrong. I entered alone. I felt the shift in the room the moment I crossed the threshold, that subtle recalibration that happens when someone unexpected arrives somewhere they are not entirely welcomed. Heads turned. Conversations softened by a degree. I recognized faces, read their expressions, noted the surprise in some and the wariness in others. My parents were near the entrance, holding court. My mother was dressed in pale blue, her composure immaculate, her smile trained on every approaching guest. My father stood slightly behind her, hands in his pockets, radiating the self-satisfaction of a man who believed the evening was entirely under his control. They saw me. My mother's smile didn't disappear, she was too practiced for that, but it tightened at the corners. My father's gaze cooled. "You came," she said, her voice pitched low, carrying a private warning beneath the social warmth. Of course, I replied, it's family. My father stepped slightly forward. That old tactic, using height, positioning, proximity as pressure. We assumed, he said, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of someone who had never once considered that I might answer back, that you'd be too embarrassed, after everything. I met his eyes. You should never assume, I said. Before he could respond, Lucas appeared, tall in his tuxedo, his ex. Pression bright with the particular luminosity of a man whose wedding day is also a personal coronation. He spread his arms, and for a moment his warmth seemed almost genuine. Glad you made it, he said, and kissed my cheek. We couldn't have done this without you. The words landed in the air between us. He had no idea how true they were. The ceremony was beautiful, I will say that honestly. Lucas's bride, a woman named Isabel whom I had met 3 times, who seemed intelligent and kind, and entirely unaware of what her wedding had been built on, cried at the altar. The guests murmured approval. The vows were spoken with real feeling. The kiss drew applause that filled the room, warm and genuine. I sat in the front row with the ivory box on my lap, and watched it all with a stillness that some guests may have mistaken for sentimentality. At the reception, the room opened into celebration. The quartet gave way to a band. Champagne circulated. My parents moved through the crowd like royalty, their pride uncontained, receiving congratulations with the practiced ease of people who believe they have earned everything they have. My father laughed loudly at jokes I couldn't hear. My mother beamed. I waited. The gift table was arranged near the edge of the dance floor, a long stretch of satin-dressed tables crowded with wrapped packages and envelopes. When the moment arrived, I rose quietly, crossed the floor, and set my ivory box among them. For the happy couple, I said, to no one in particular. My mother was close enough to hear. She looked at the box, then at me, with a smile that held all its blades behind its warmth. How thoughtful, she said, the emphasis precise, the condescension perfect. She believed she was watching a defeated woman perform a final act of gracious surrender. She had never been more wrong. When Lucas lifted the box for the traditional opening, guests gathering, phones raised, the band quieting, I took my position near the center of the room. Not on the stage, not commanding attention. Simply present, visible, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched. Lucas unknotted the ribbon, unfolded the paper, lifted the velvet folder. He opened it with the casual confidence of a man expecting a check. He froze. The color left his face in a single wave, the way water recedes from a shore before a wave arrives. He read a line, read it again. His mouth opened slightly but no sound came out. My father leaned over his shoulder, his smirk dissolved, his hand tightened on Lucas's arm. My mother, reading from the side, went perfectly, absolutely still. The room began to sense that something was wrong. The murmuring shifted. Guests craned their necks. Someone laughed nervously at the back and then stopped. Lucas looked up at me. His eyes were wide and bewildered, and somewhere underneath the shock, already beginning to understand. What is this? He whispered. I raised my glass slowly. Consider it my wedding gift, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the silence that had gathered around us like weather. And a receipt for everything that was taken from me. The ballroom doors opened. 2 uniformed officers entered, flanked by Vera Chen, who moved through the crowd with the precise, unhurried confidence of someone who has spent her entire career walking into rooms that don't expect her. She carried a leather folio. She did not look around. She walked directly toward the gift table, toward my family, and stopped. Good evening, she said. We are here regarding the unlawful sale of a property held in protected trust. Gasps moved through the crowd in a wave. My mother's composure, so impeccably maintained for so many decades, cracked for the first time I had ever witnessed. Her hands trembled. Her face, stripped suddenly of its performance, looked older than I remembered. You wouldn't, she whispered. I already have, I said. My father turned to face me fully. Every trace of the smug, comfortable man I had feared my whole childhood was gone, replaced by something rower and uglier. Disbelief colliding with rage, colliding with the dawning knowledge that he had miscalculated, badly, finally, publicly. How could you do this to your own family? he said, his voice tight. The question landed in the room. I let it. You did it first, I replied. You just assumed I wouldn't notice. The officers stepped forward. My parents were asked, formally and quietly, to accompany them for questioning. Their exit was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was slow and visible, two people moving through a crowd of 200 who had watched their lives, attended their events, trusted their image. The silence that followed them was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Lucas stood at the gift table, the documents still in his hands, his tuxedo suddenly seeming to fit poorly. Isabel had stepped back from him, her bridal bouquet held against her chest, her expression asking a question she clearly hadn't expected to need to ask on her wedding day. He came to me finally, his voice stripped of everything except exhaustion. You didn't have to do this today, he said. This was my wedding. You used my home to pay for it, I replied. He flinched, something moved through his face, regret perhaps, or the beginning of it. I thought you'd forgive us, he said. I did, I told him. Every time, for 20 years. I looked at him steadily. But I let you confuse my forgiveness with consent. That was my mistake, I won't make it again. He lowered his head. I turned and walked toward the exit. The night air outside the venue was cool and still, carrying the faint smell of rain somewhere distant. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't need to. Behind those chandeliers and white roses and the shattered remains of a celebration, my family was confronting the first real consequence of their choices. I had no satisfaction in it. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was not triumph. It was something quieter and much harder to name. The particular piece of a person who has finally stopped making themselves smaller to fit someone else's comfort. The legal proceedings moved quickly. The fraudulent sale was voided within days. The trust documents, all those pages my parents had signed without reading, held exactly as they were designed to hold. The apartment was restored to me fully, unambiguously, legally mine in every way that mattered. My parents faced criminal fraud charges. The process was slow, as these things are, and I followed it with the detached attention of someone watching news from a country they once lived in. Lucas's marriage did not survive the revelation. Isabel was a woman of principle, as it turned out, and the discovery that her wedding had been financed through the theft of her new husband's sister's home was not something she could absorb and move past. They separated within 3 months. I heard this through mutual acquaintances and felt nothing except a vague hope that she would land somewhere better. One evening, weeks later, I stood on my balcony watching the city settle into its lights. The air was soft. Somewhere below, a car horn sounded and faded. The ordinary, continuous noise of a city that does not know or care about the private upheavals happening inside its buildings, and finds that not uncaring but simply continuous, life proceeding, as it always does, regardless. I had spent 20 years giving to people who translated my generosity into evidence of my weakness. I had let them call my patience submission, my silence agreement, my love an open account they could draw on indefinitely without acknowledgement. I had believed for a long time that this was what family meant. It wasn't. What I understood now, standing in the quiet of the apartment I had saved and fought for and protected without anyone knowing, was that my strength had never been visible to them because I had never needed it to be. I had built it in private, patiently, for exactly this purpose, and it had worked exactly as designed. They had taken my trust. They had taken my patience. They had taken years of my money and years of my silence, and had mistaken both for inexhaustible resources. What they had never managed to take, what they had never even understood existed, was the part of me that had been watching and planning and building and waiting. The life they had tried to steal was the one I had already made sure they could never touch. I stepped back inside and closed the door quietly behind me,